Clara knew the rules. Mr. Henderson, her manager at Rosie's Diner, had just drilled him into the morning staff with his usual stress precision. No free food. Not even a stale crust. Inventory is tight, people. His words still echoed in her ears, a stark reminder of the tightrope she walked every day. But as she glanced through the steamy diner window, her gaze fell upon the frail, shivering man hunched on the bus stop bench outside. His tattered military jacket, a ghost of past valor, seemed no match for the biting November wind. An undeniable ache resonated deep in Clara's chest. She was just a waitress, 24 years old, juggling this job with another part-time gig and late-night college courses, her own rent barely covered, her own future a fragile dream. Helping this stranger, directly defying Henderson's explicit order, could cost her everything. The job she desperately needed, her already precarious stability. Yet, the sight of his quiet suffering was a magnet, pulling at her conscience. What Clara couldn't possibly fathom in that moment was that the desperate, compassionate choice she was about to make wouldn't just put her job on the line. It was about to trigger a chain of events so profound, so astonishing, it would ripple through every corner of Rosie's Diner, leaving its staff, its patrons, and one hidden hero utterly and completely speechless. Clara's life was a carefully constructed balancing act. Her tiny apartment, just a few blocks from Rosie's, felt more like a holding cell for her ambitions than a home. Dreams of finishing her social work degree felt impossibly distant, buried under bills and the constant exhaustion that clung to her like the scent of fried food after a long shift. It was this intimate acquaintance with hardship, with a gnawing fear of an empty pantry or an overdue notice, that had carved such a deep well of empathy within her. She understood, in her bones, what it meant to feel invisible, to yearn for a small kindness in a world that often felt indifferent. Rosie's Diner itself was a neighborhood landmark, a comforting relic of a bygone era. The air inside perpetually hummed with the aroma of strong coffee, sizzling bacon, and the sweet promise of freshly baked pies. Its vinyl booths, lovingly worn and cracked, had witnessed countless stories unfold. The Formica countertops, buffed smooth by generations of elbows and coffee cups, gleamed under the warm lights. It was a place of fleeting moments and steadfast regulars, a daily theater of human connection and quiet struggles. And Clara, with her gentle eyes that always seemed to notice the unnoticed, and a smile that could melt even the iciest demeanor, was an integral part of its fabric. She remembered Mrs. Peterson liked her toast barely browned, and that Mr. Henderson's afternoon coffee needed an extra sugar. She'd once subtly covered the cost of a young mother's meal when her card was declined, feigning a machine error until a flustered woman was gone. These were her small, quiet acts of defiance against the harshness she often saw. Mr. Henderson, the diner's manager, was a man perpetually wound-tight, a knot of stress and fiscal responsibility. His thinning hair was always meticulously combed, his tie a little too constricting, as if holding back a tide of anxieties. He wasn't inherently unkind. Clara sensed the immense pressure he was under. Whispers among the staff suggested the diner's out-of-state owners were considering selling if profits didn't pick up. This fear drove Henderson's hawk-like vigilance over every expenditure, every scrap of food. "Waste not, want not isn't just a saying, it's policy," he declared, his gaze sweeping the kitchen. His strict enforcement of the no-free food rule felt like a personal affront to Clara's compassionate instincts. Their interactions were a dance of professional courtesy, masking an unspoken tension, his need for control versus her need to care. The cheerful jingle of the bell above the diner door announced a new arrival, cutting through the mid-morning lull. Clara looked up, and her breath hitched. It was him, the man from the bus stop. He moved with a slow, deliberate caution, as if each step was negotiation with pain. His gaze swept the diner, a hint of apprehension in his eyes, before he settled onto a vacant stool at the far end of the counter, the most inconspicuous spot. Clara watched him, her heart sinking with a familiar pang. Up close, the signs of hardship were even more pronounced. He was older than she'd initially guessed, perhaps in his late 60s or early 70s, though life on the streets had clearly etched extra years onto his face. It was gaunt, shadowed by more than just the brim of the worn, soft hat he clutched nervously in his hands. The military jacket, though remarkably clean, was frayed at the cuffs, the fabric thin and worn. He slid onto the stool, avoiding everyone's gaze, and picked up a laminated menu. His eyes, however, didn't scan the descriptions of omelets and burgers. They darted immediately to the prices, a fleeting shadow. Was it shame? Or perhaps cold calculation, crossing his features before he quickly composed himself. Clara approached, her practiced, friendly smile already in place. "Good morning," she said softly. "Coffee." He looked up then, and she saw his eyes for the first time. They were a startling, piercing blue, but filmed with a deep, weary sorrow that seemed to absorb the diner's cheerful light. Just a glass of water, please, miss," he replied, his voice a low, raspy whisper. "If that's all right." "Of course," Clara said, her smile softening with unforced warmth. As she filled a glass from the fountain, she noticed his hands. They were gnarled, the knuckles swollen, and they trembled almost imperceptibly as he reached for the water. He took a long, slow sip, as if it were a precious elixir, his eyes closing briefly. He kept the menu propped open in front of him, a flimsy barricade against the world, but he made no move to order. Clara recognized the posture, the averted gaze. It was the stance of someone trying to buy a few moments of warmth, of normalcy, on the price of the cheapest thing they could request. Her chest tightened. Mr. Henderson was, thankfully, in the back office, likely engrossed in the previous day's receipts. This was a window, a small, risky opportunity. The image of the man's trembling hands, the hollows beneath his prominent cheekbones, refused to leave Clara's mind. The diner was experiencing a typical mid-morning flow, not too crowded, not too empty. The low hum of conversations and the rhythmic clatter of cutlery from the kitchen provided a decent shield of ambient noise. Henderson's office door remained firmly shut. Clara's own meager lunch, a slightly bruised apple and granola bar, suddenly felt like an unearned feast. Her own lunch break wasn't for another hour and a half. Then an idea, sharp and sudden, pierced through her apprehension. Just a moment ago, a customer had ordered a short stack of pancakes with a side of bacon, then abruptly changed his mind after she'd already punched it into the system. She'd voided the ticket, but Sal, the diner's gruff but kind-hearted cook, had already fired the order. "Just stick it under the heat lamp," Sal had grumbled, wiping his hands on his apron. "Someone will take it eventually. Don't let it go cold." It was still there, a perfectly good, warm breakfast. Clara's heart began to pound against her ribs like a trapped bird. This wasn't just offering an extra cup of coffee on the house. This was a full meal. If Henderson caught her, her job, her lifeline, would be gone. She could almost feel the cold weight of his disapproval. But then an image of the veteran surfaced in her mind, his quiet dignity battling so visibly with his desperate need. She thought of her own grandfather, a kind, proud man who had served his country faithfully and deserved so much more comfort and respect in his later years than he'd received. The parallel was too strong to ignore. Taking a shallow, steadying breath, Clara walked over to the stainless steel shelf beneath the heat lamp. Her movements felt deliberate, almost robotic. She carefully plated the golden brown pancakes, nestled the crisp strips of bacon beside them, and even managed to find a small pat of butter and a miniature pitcher of syrup. Her hands, surprisingly, were steady as she carried the plate toward the far end of the counter, towards a waiting man. She set it down gently in front of him. "Excuse me," she began, her voice low, almost conspiratorial, trying to project a calmness she didn't feel. "The kitchen made an extra breakfast by mistake. It's just going to go to waste if someone doesn't eat it. Please, would you like it?" The man looked up, startled. His clear blue eyes widened, first in sheer disbelief, then a flicker of suspicion clouded them. He stared at the steaming plate, then at Clara's earnest face, then back at the plate as if it were a mirage that might evaporate. I can't possibly pay for that, miss," he stammered, a faint flush rising on his weathered cheeks. No, it's truly no problem at all," Clara insisted, her voice soft but firm, offering what she hoped was a disarming and reassuring smile. "It's already made. It's on the house. Better be enjoyed than thrown out. Wouldn't you agree?" She tried to make it sound like the most natural thing in the world, a common occurrence. He hesitated for a long, agonizing moment, his gaze searching hers, looking for a trick, a catch. Then something in her unwavering, gentle expression seemed to break through his reserve. His shoulders, which had been held ramrod straight, slumped almost imperceptibly. A single, large tear welled in the corner of his eye, overflowed and traced a slow, deliberate path down his creased cheek. He quickly, almost angrily, brushed it away with the back of his trembling hand. "Thank you, miss," he whispered, his voice thick with unshed tears and an emotion so profound it made Clara's own eyes sting. "Thank you." He picked up the fork, his hand still shaking, but this time it seemed to be with a different kind of tremor, perhaps anticipation or relief. He cut into the stack of pancakes, took a bite, and then closed his eyes for a long moment as he chewed, a look of almost painful pleasure on his face. A wave of warmth, potent and deeply satisfying, spread through Clara's chest, a feeling far richer than any paycheck could provide. She quickly turned away, busying herself by wiping down an already clean section of the counter, affording him a measure of privacy to eat. She risked a fleeting glance towards Mr. Henderson's office. The door was still closed. For now, her secret act of rebellion was safe, and a desperately hungry man was finally, gratefully, eating. The fragile connection forged over that plate of mistake pancakes felt more real, more vital than any diner policy. The veteran, whose name Clara soon learned was Arthur, became a quiet, almost daily presence at that far end of the counter. He'd materialized mid-morning, after the frenetic breakfast rush had subsided but before the lunchtime crowd descended. He always insisted on paying for a single cup of black coffee, carefully counting out his few coins onto the worn formica. He never asked for more, never once alluded to Clara's initial act of kindness. But his eyes, those startlingly clear blue eyes, would never be find Clara's across the diner, and in that shared glance there'd be a silent acknowledgment, a profound, unspoken gratitude that resonated deeply within her. Clara, in turn, found herself unconsciously looking for him each morning. The accidental extra orders from the kitchen became a little more frequent, though she had exercised increasing caution and ingenuity. A bowl of soup that was just a tad too peppery for a regular customer, an over-toasted grilled cheese sandwich, a day-old muffin that was perfectly fine but nearing its display limit. She presented these offerings with the same quiet, matter-of-fact explanation, and Arthur would accept with that same deep, understated gratitude that squeezed Clara's heart. Sometimes she'd pack a little something extra in her own meager lunch, a piece of fruit, a hard-boiled egg, half of her sandwich, and offer to share because she simply couldn't manage it all. Their conversations were brief, punctuated by the diner's ambient sounds. Arthur spoke very little of his past, deflecting personal inquiries with gentle, sad smile or a non-committal comment about the weather. Yet Clara slowly pieced together small details. He preferred his coffee strong and black. He would meticulously read any newspaper left behind by a previous patron, from the front page to the classifieds, and a wistful look would cross his face when the diner's old radio played songs by Frank Sinatra or Dean Martin. He carried himself with an inherent, quiet dignity that seemed at odds with his threadbare clothes and evident poverty. He was always impeccably polite, always careful to tidy his small space at the counter before he quietly slipped away. Mr. Henderson, however, was a man whose eyes missed very little. He began to register Arthur's consistent presence, the way Clara sometimes lingered a moment longer at his end of the counter. His comments during staff briefings about meticulously tracking inventory and unauthorized food disbursements became more pointed, more frequent. "Remember, team," he'd say, his gaze sweeping pointedly towards Clara, making her stomach clench. "Every slice of bread, every pat of butter has a cost. We are operating a business, not a charitable institution. Sympathy, unfortunately, doesn't pay the utility bills." A knot of anxiety tightened in Clara's stomach with each such pronouncement. She knew she was treading on thin ice. Her own financial situation was a constant source of stress. Losing this job would be a catastrophe she couldn't afford to contemplate. Yet the thought of Arthur going hungry, of that fragile spark of hope she saw in his eyes being extinguished, was an even greater burden. So she became more adept at subterfuge, her small acts of kindness cloaked in even greater secrecy. She'd wait until Mr. Henderson was engrossed in a phone call in his glass-walled office, or momentarily distracted by a delivery driver, before discreetly slipping Arthur a small package of crackers or a piece of fruit saved from her own sparse provisions. The risk made her heart pound in her chest like a drum, but the almost imperceptible, grateful nod from Arthur, the fleeting warmth in his eyes, made it feel essential, worthwhile. One raw afternoon, as Arthur nursed his coffee, he looked even paler than usual. A dry, racking cough shook his frail frame, making him wince. Clara, her brow furrowed with concern, quickly brought him an extra glass of water. "Are you all right, Arthur?" she asked softly, leaning in slightly. He waved a dismissive hand, though his attempt at a reassuring smile didn't quite reach his tired eyes. "Just a bit of a chill, my dear girl. This old engine, it isn't quite what it once was." He paused, then, in a rare moment of disclosure, added, "You remind me of my granddaughter, you know. Same kind eyes." A shadow, swift and deep, crossed his face before he quickly looked away, retreating into his customary shell reserve. It was a tiny fissure in the wall of his solitude, a fleeting glimpse of a life and a love that existed beyond the confines of the diner counter. It only strengthened Clara's resolve to help him, Mr. Henderson's increasingly suspicious gaze notwithstanding. The unspoken bond between them, forged in whispered kindnesses and shared secrets, was deepening, becoming a fragile, yet vital, lifeline in Arthur's otherwise solitary existence. Then, for 3 agonizingly long days, Arthur didn't appear. The stool at the far end of the counter remained starkly, accusingly empty, a silent void in Clara's daily routine. Each jingle of the diner door sent a surge of anxious hope through her, quickly followed by disappointment. She found herself constantly scanning the street outside, searching for his familiar, stooped silhouette, but the bus stop bench remained vacant. Mr. Henderson, seemingly oblivious to Clara's mounting distress, appeared almost relieved by the absence of the man he'd once dismissively referred to as the counter-loiterer. Clara's worry became persistent, gnawing ache. Had he fallen seriously ill? Had something worse befallen him? She knew so little about his life outside these walls, had no way to check on his well-being. The chilling thought that her small, clandestine acts of kindness might have been insufficient, too late, filled her with a profound and helpless sadness. On the fourth morning, as Clara was mechanically wiping down the already spotless counter, her mind replaying her last brief, concerned exchange with Arthur, the diner door opened. It wasn't Arthur. Instead, a man in a sharply tailored dark suit, looking conspicuously out of place amidst Rosie's homey, unpretentious decor, stepped inside. He was tall, perhaps in his early 50s, with a kind but unmistakably serious demeanor. He surveyed the diner methodically, his intelligent eyes passing over the scattering of regulars until they settled directly on Clara. He approached her with a purposeful stride. "Excuse me," he said, his voice calm, professional, yet with an undercurrent Clara couldn't quite decipher. "I'm looking for a waitress who works here. I believe her name might be Clara." Clara's heart gave a violent lurch. This had to be about Arthur. Was it trouble? Had Mr. Henderson finally made good on his implied threats and reported her? "I'm Clara," she managed, her voice barely a whisper, her palms suddenly damp. The man's expression softened almost immediately. "My name is David Pendleton," he said, extending a perfectly manicured hand. Clara hesitantly shook it. "I'm Arthur's son." "Arthur's son?" Clara stared at him, dumbfounded. Arthur had never mentioned a son. That one fleeting, poignant reference to a granddaughter was the only family tie he'd ever hinted at. David Pendleton continued, his voice now laced with deep, resonant emotion that mirrored Clara's own recent worry. "My father, Arthur, he's been going through a profoundly difficult period. We were estranged for several years. It's a complicated story, perhaps for another time. I've been searching for him for quite a while. He's an intensely proud man, you see. He wouldn't ask for help, not easily." He paused, his gaze locking with Clara's, an intensity there that made her breath catch in her throat. "He finally reached out to me a few days ago. He's safe now, Clara. He's getting the medical care and support he needs. And he told me all about you. He told me about a waitress at Rosie's diner, a young woman whose kindness, whose incredible, persistent, quiet kindness was, in his words, the only light he'd seen in a very, very long time. He said you fed him when he was starving. He said you treated him with dignity when he felt completely invisible to the rest of the world. He said you saved him, Clara, not just from hunger, but from utter despair." Tears welled instantly in Clara's eyes, blurring the concerned face of the man before her. A wave of relief, so potent it almost buckled her knees, washed over her, swiftly followed by an overwhelming surge of emotion. Arthur was safe, and he had remembered her. He had valued her small gestures. "He told me," David continued, his own eyes now glistening with unshed tears, "that your simple, repeated act of giving him food, of just seeing him as a fellow human being, gave him the courage, the flicker of hope he needed to make that call, to try and reconnect, to believe that maybe, just maybe, things would get better for him." Just then, Mr. Henderson emerged from his office, his eyes, as always, scanning for any deviation from his meticulously managed order. His gaze fell immediately upon the impeccably dressed stranger, engaged in an animated, emotional conversation with his waitress. He strode over, his expression a familiar mixture of suspicion and managerial front. "Is there a problem here, Clara?" he asked, his tone clipped and sharp. Before Clara could even form a response, David Pendleton turned to face Mr. Henderson. "No problem at all, sir. In fact, quite the contrary. I was just expressing my profound gratitude to Clara for the extraordinary compassion she has shown to my father, Sergeant Major Arthur Pendleton, retired." Mr. Henderson blinked, his jaw slackening slightly. "Sergeant Major," he repeated, the title sounding foreign and incongruous on his lips. David nodded, a flicker of pride in his eyes. "Yes, my father is a decorated veteran. He served 2 tours of duty. He's a Silver Star recipient. He fell on unimaginably hard times after my mother passed, lost his home, his pension through a scam, and eventually his connection with his family, largely due to untreated PTSD and a series of tragic misfortunes. He was too proud, too ashamed to tell anyone, to ask for help." He turned back to Clara, his voice thick with an almost unbearable gratitude, until this remarkable young woman showed him that decency and kindness still exist in this world. The revelation hung in the air, thick and palpable. Sergeant Major Arthur Pendleton, the frail, shivering man whom Clara had secretly fed, risking her own livelihood, was a war hero. The few patrons nearby who had inadvertently overheard the exchange fell utterly silent, their breakfast forgotten, their attention completely captivated. Mr. Henderson looked utterly stunned, his usual bluster and officiousness deflating like a pricked balloon. He stared from David to Clara and back again, his face a canvas of disbelief. Clara simply stood there, tears now streaming silently and unchecked down her face, a maelstrom of emotions swirling within her. Overwhelming relief, profound humility, and a dizzying sense of awe at the utterly unexpected turn of events. The diner, usually a place of cheerful clatter and lively chatter, was momentarily, profoundly, utterly speechless. As the weight of David Pendleton's words settled over the diner, the bell above the door jingled once more. This time, framed in the doorway, was Arthur, but it was an Arthur transformed. He was still lean, yes, the lines of hardship still etched on his face, but he stood straighter, his shoulders less bowed by invisible burdens. He was clean-shaven, his silver hair neatly combed. He wore a simple but clean pressed button-down shirt and dark slacks. Looking years younger, the deep weariness in his eyes noticeably lessened, replaced by a fragile but discernible hope. He leaned lightly on his son's arm as David, who had evidently excused himself for a moment, guided him towards the counter, towards Clara. The entire diner seemed to hold a collective breath. Patrons who had been engrossed in their newspapers or lost in quiet conversations now watched, their expressions a mixture of curiosity and dawning understanding. Mr. Henderson remained rooted to the spot, his face a complex mask of shock, disbelief, and what looked like a burgeoning, uncomfortable sense of shame. Arthur's gaze found Clara's, and a slow, genuine smile spread across his face. It was a smile that reached his clear blue eyes, igniting a warm light within them. He gently disengaged his arm from David's and took a tentative step toward her, his movement still a little unsteady, but imbued with newfound purpose, a quiet confidence. He stopped directly in front of her, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. "Clara," he said, his voice still raspy but clear now, carrying with surprising strength through the hushed diner. "My dear girl." He reached out and gently, reverently, took her hand between both of his. His own were surprisingly warm, the tremor almost gone. I don't possess the words, Clara, to truly thank you for what you've done. Clara could only shake her head, tears blurring her vision of his kind face. Arthur, I'm just so glad, so incredibly glad you're okay, she managed, her voice choked with emotion. Okay. He let out a soft, dry chuckle, a sound of pure, unadulterated relief. Clara, my dear, I am more than okay. I am found, and it is because of you. He turned slightly, his gaze encompassing not just Clara, but the entire silent, watching diner. His voice gained a new resonance, a quiet authority. For a very long time, I was lost. I was invisible. People looked right through me, or worse. They looked at me with pity, sometimes with disgust. I had forgotten what it felt like to be seen, to be treated like a human being worthy of respect. A collective sigh, almost a soft gasp, swept through the diner. Several patrons were now openly weeping, dabbing at their eyes with napkins. A man at a nearby booth began to clap, a slow, hesitant sound at first, then joined by another and another, until the entire diner erupted in a wave of heartfelt, spontaneous applause. It wasn't just for Arthur's incredible story of redemption. It was for Clara, for her quiet courage, her unwavering compassion, her simple, profound decency. Clara stood there, utterly overwhelmed, tears flowing freely now, not tears of sadness, but profound, almost unbearable joy and humility. She looked at Arthur, his face alight with gratitude, at his son David, beaming with pride and relief beside him, and then at the faces of the strangers in the diner, their expressions softened by shared emotion. Mr. Henderson, who had been standing as if turned to stone, finally moved. His face was pale, his usual stern, officious demeanor completely gone, replaced by an expression of deep contrition. He approached Arthur, his posture uncharacteristically humble, almost deferential. Sergeant Major Pendleton, he began, his voice uncharacteristically subdued, almost a murmur. I am deeply, profoundly sorry. I had no idea. I misjudged everything. He cleared his throat, his atoms apple bobbing. Please allow us. Your breakfast, indeed, all your meals here, they are on the house. From this day forward. Always. Arthur smiled, a gracious, forgiving smile. Thank you, Mr. Henderson. That's a very kind offer. He then looked back at Clara, his eyes twinkling with a hint of mischief. But I believe today my son and I would very much like to be paying customers. And we like to order the most expensive items on your menu, and then leave a very, very generous tip for the finest, kindest waitress in this city. The applause swelled again, louder this time, punctuated by laughter and sniffles of relief. Clara, through her own tears, found herself laughing too, a bright, beautiful sound that seemed to crystallize the unexpected joy and hope that had suddenly, miraculously, bloomed in the very heart of Rosie's diner. The small, hidden act of kindness, sown in secret and nurtured by courage, had finally, gloriously, come into the light, and their radiant warmth touched everyone present. The days and weeks that followed were transformative, not just for Clara and Arthur, but for the entire ecosystem of Rosie's diner. News of Clara's quiet compassion and Sergeant Major Arthur Pendleton's remarkable story spread like a benevolent wildfire through the neighborhood and beyond. People started coming into the diner specifically to meet Clara, to shake her hand, to express their admiration, often leaving a little extra in the tip jar with a knowing smile. Clara, naturally shy, was initially embarrassed by the sudden attention, but also deeply moved by the outpouring of goodwill. Mr. Henderson, true to his word, ensured Arthur always felt like an honored guest. More than that, a genuine shift had occurred within the manager himself. The perpetual worry lines around his eyes seemed to soften. His voice lost some of its sharp, anxious edge. He even, with Clara's quiet encouragement, initiated a pay-it-forward board near the register, where customers could prepay for a coffee or a small meal for someone who might be struggling. Clara, to her immense relief and profound surprise, did not lose her job. In fact, when the diner's notoriously reclusive and formidable owner, Mrs. Rosie O'Malley herself, an elderly woman with a sharp wit and a rarely seen softer side, who hadn't set foot in the diner in years, heard the entire story from a deeply humble Mr. Henderson. She came in person. Mrs. O'Malley, a war widow herself, listened to Arthur's account with tears in her eyes. She publicly commended Clara for her integrity and bravery, gave her a substantial bonus, and most astonishingly, established a small scholarship fund to help her complete her college degree. This diner was named Rosie's for a reason, young lady, Mrs. O'Malley had said, her stern gaze softening with a rare, approving twinkle. It's supposed to be about warmth, about community, about taking care of people. You, Clara, reminded us all of that fundamental truth. Arthur Pendleton, with the unwavering support of his son David, began the slow, steady process of rebuilding his life. He found secure housing, navigated the bureaucracy to access his rightful veteran benefits, and started attending regular therapy sessions for his PTSD. He became a cherished regular at Rosie's, no longer a man defined by shadows and whispered assumptions, but a beloved storyteller, a living piece of history, regaling patrons with tales of his youth, his service, and his profound, enduring gratitude for a second chance. He always made sure to sit at Clara's station, and their conversations were now easy and open, filled with comfortable silences and ready laughter. He even met Clara's own grandfather one afternoon when he visited the diner, and the two old soldiers found an instant heartfelt camaraderie, sharing stories that bridged generations. The very atmosphere in Rosie's diner changed. It became more than just a place to eat. It blossomed into a vibrant hub of community spirit, a tangible testament to the incredible, far-reaching power of a single, selfless act of kindness. Clara continued her work, her smile a little brighter, her heart a little lighter, her step a little surer, carried with her the certain knowledge that even in a world that often felt cold, indifferent, and overwhelming, simple human compassion could indeed spark a chain reaction of profound goodness, mending broken spirits, reconnecting lost souls, and warming an entire community from the inside out. And often, as she'd pour a cup of coffee or take an order, she'd glance towards that once lonely stool at the far end of the counter, the one Arthur used to occupy during his darkest, most invisible days. It served as her quiet, constant reminder that true compassion often costs nothing more than courage, yet its value is utterly immeasurable, and that sometimes the most profound and beautiful changes begin with the simple, brave decision to truly see another human being, to reach out and to care. The kindness she had sown in secret had unexpectedly blossomed for all the world to witness, leaving everyone it touched with a renewed sense of hope and a deep, satisfying warmth that lingered long after the last plate was cleared and the lights of Rosie's diner were dimmed for the night.